Hi, everybody. I just thought I'd give you a little introduction to connective tissues. And so sometimes I'm going to ask you, give you a name of an object and say which kind of tissue it is. Well, epithelial tissues are on surfaces. Muscle tissues are pretty obvious, making up muscular parts of the body. Nervous tissue make up the nerves and the neuroglia, brain and the spinal cord. So everything else, if I ask you, it's probably connective tissue. Connective tissue fills in spaces, it gives us cushion, it stores fat, all sorts of stuff. And I just want to give you a couple pointers about connective tissues because there's a lot of them, and I think people can get them confused pretty easily. But one of the main things to remember is that connective tissues have a little bit different structure than what we talked about with epithelial tissue. With epithelial tissue, we had lots of cells that were close together, and the cells had different shapes. In connective tissues, or at least almost all connective tissues, we have cells. And so I have a chocolate chip cookie here to illustrate that the chocolate chips are cells, and there's stuff in between the cells, and that stuff would be called matrix. Now you won't see this without a microscope, but you can look at some of these tissues and see structure similar to this, that there's a matrix and cells. And within that matrix, a lot of times there's fibers. Now, connective tissues can be solid, they can be semi-solid, or they can be liquid. And I can give you examples of all three of those that have this structure. So a solid connective tissue would have cells in the example of a bone. So a bone is made mostly of connective tissue. It has cells called osteocytes. You don't have to remember that word right now. And the matrix is made of a calcium material, so it's hard. A semi-solid connective tissue would be something like cartilage. And you're all familiar with cartilage being kind of flexible. And so they have the cells in cartilage would be, they're called chondrocytes. Again, you don't have to remember that word, but cartilage has cells, and the matrix in between is a material that's pretty flexible. It has a lot of fibers and has a lot of flex and cushion. And then finally, a liquid connective tissue would be something like blood. So we're going to be talking more this semester about blood cells. So again, the chocolate chips would be the blood cells, and the dough to the cookie would be the liquid matrix, which would, in the case of blood, is called plasma. So connective tissues have this kind of unique structure. There is one exception. Here's a microscopic view of adipose, which is fat tissue, and you'll notice that these are just big open cells. And it turns out adipose is an exception because it's a connective tissue without a matrix. It does have cells that are close together. Finally, I just want to encourage you to look at some of the microscopic pictures of connective tissues in your book, particularly connective tissues like the loose connective tissue of fascia and the dense connective tissue of tendons. And you'll notice that the fibers in the matrix of those tissues are organized based on how the tissue functions. So fascia has loose connective tissue, and it's designed to stretch in all in different directions, but not tear. And the same thing, and so the fibers are going all different directions at once. In the case of a tendon, you're typically pulling a tendon just in two directions. So all the fibers in the tendon tend to run all in the same direction. So mostly what you're seeing in those microscopic pictures are the fibers which are in the matrix of the connective tissue. So hopefully that gave you a little introduction to connective tissue. Now you can work on the rest of the information in your book. Good luck.